Somewhere in the world right now, an invisible robot is typing, like, your childhood pet's name into a banking portal.
Yeah. And the truly terrifying part is that your bank's highly advanced, multi-million dollar security system might just open the front door and welcome it right in.
It's completely wild. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at the mechanics of this massive automated financial crime ecosystem.
Right.
We have this exclusive source document today called Credential Stuffing, the Industrialization of Financial Account Compromise. And our mission is basically to unpack how that one bad habit so many of us share, using the same password for a throwaway streaming service as our main bank account, how that fuels this whole industry.
Yeah, that simple choice, just made out of convenience on some totally insignificant website, it's the catalyst for a global digital butterfly effect. I mean, it forces us to completely rethink what the word trust actually means in the digital financial world.
Because we've built our entire online economy on this assumption, right? That if someone holds the right key, they must be the rightful owner of the house.
Exactly. And this specific threat, credential stuffing, it turns that assumption completely upside down.
So before we can even begin to understand how banks and financial institutions are fighting back, we really need to wrap our heads around the terrifying scale of the attack mechanism itself.
Hmm.
Let's talk about the master key factory. Because credential stuffing is categorized as a cyber-enabled financial crime. Criminals aren't just like guessing your password out of thin air, right?
No, not at all. They are taking huge volumes of previously compromised usernames, email addresses, and passwords, stuff that was leaked in breaches from completely unrelated websites.
Right, like a random online forum or something.
Yeah, exactly. And then they use that stolen data to automate access across major digital platforms.
Which brings us to the economics of this crime, because I think that's what makes it so persistent. Like, a common misconception is that a criminal needs a high success rate to make a profit.
Right? People assume, well, if someone steals 1 million passwords from a random shoe store, maybe only a tiny, tiny fraction of those people use the exact same email and password combo for their banking portal.
Because, people change their passwords or they use a junk email for shopping.
Exactly. So people think it's not a big deal.
But mathematically, that low success rate doesn't actually deter the attackers at all.
No, it doesn't.
I mean, if I steal 1 million passwords and only 10 of them work on a major bank site, how can a criminal afford to run an entire operation on a fraction of a percent success rate?
Because that low success rate is actually the secret to their whole business model. It is completely a volume game.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. If attackers test, say, 10 million credential pairs using automated tools and they only get a 0.1% success rate, well, they have still just unlocked 10,000 legitimate accounts.
10,000 accounts just from a 0.1% hit rate.
Right. And think about what is inside those accounts.
Yeah.
You've got stored payment methods, detailed personal data, thousands of dollars in loyalty balances maybe, and verified, deeply trusted customer relationships.
So the financial payout for just a small handful of successful logins massively outweighs the negligible cost of running the software.
Exactly. The software is cheap. The payout is huge.
The way I'm picturing this in my head, it's a complete departure from how we normally imagine bank robbers or like cyber criminals. Historically, we think of a cat burglar, right?
Right.
Someone in a black turtleneck carefully picking the lock of a single specific high-value target.
The classic Hollywood heist.
Right. But credential stuffing is an industrialized factory. They're manufacturing millions of stolen keys on an assembly line.
Yeah.
And then they're employing this invisible army of robots to walk down the street and jiggle every single door handle in the entire city simultaneously, just to see which ones happen to click open.
That is the perfect analogy for the mechanism at play here. The key word from the source to really focus on is industrialization. I mean, this is volume-based warfare.
Volume-based warfare.
Yeah, it's not a targeted attack on you as an individual victim. The attackers, they don't necessarily know who you are, what you do, or how much money you have when they start.
They just have a list.
Right. They are simply converting static, stolen data from the broader online economy into dynamic financial crime opportunities. They're playing a numbers game at a scale perfectly suited to exploit modern digital banking.
Because our digital access is the absolute center of how we interact with our money now.
Exactly. And to pull this off, they use massive bot infrastructures and anonymized networks.
Okay, I want to break down how that bot infrastructure actually functions. Because if it's this massive, noisy robot army jiggling millions of door handles at the exact same time, the obvious question is, why doesn't the bank security system just sound the alarm immediately?
Well, you would think it would.
Right. Surely a modern financial institution can tell when 10,000 login attempts are suddenly coming from a single computer server in another country.
They absolutely can, which is why the attackers don't do it that way.
Of course.
They route their traffic through anonymized networks. They hijack normal, everyday devices.
Wait, everyday devices? Like what?
Like a smart fridge, a vulnerable home router, or just someone's personal computer. And they funnel their login attempts through those residential IP addresses.
So to the bank, the traffic doesn't look like a massive server farm in another country at all.
No, it looks like a regular person sitting in a living room in Ohio trying to log into their checking account. The attack weaponizes the system's own definition of trust.
Okay, hold on. I feel like we're letting the bank off the hook here just a little bit.
How so?
Well, if I hand the bank's website my exact correct password, it has to let me in.
Right.
That's the entire purpose of a password. So if a shoe store gets hacked and the hackers steal my email and password and then use it at my bank, how is that the bank's fault? The bank software is working perfectly.
This is the core vulnerability. And the source document highlights this as a major flaw in how security models have been designed for the last 2 decades.
Okay.
The flaw is treating authentication as a point-in-time gate.
A point-in-time gate, meaning you show your ID at the door, the bouncer checks it, and once you're inside the club, you can do whatever you want.
Exactly. Many institutions have historically viewed security strictly as that front door. But credential stuffing exposes the glaring weakness of the point-in-time approach.
Because the credentials are, in fact, perfectly valid.
Right. The bouncer is looking at a real ID. What is missing is contextual analysis. The issue is not whether the credential is mathematically correct.
Right.
The issue is whether the context of its use matches genuine customer behavior.
Okay, so the bouncer checks the ID, it's real, and you're in. But without contextual analysis, the bouncer isn't noticing that you're, like, wearing a thick winter parka in July.
Yes. Or you're walking with a totally different physical date than you usually do, and you immediately sprint toward the cash register instead of the bar.
That's it exactly.
Yeah.
The key is right, but the behavior is entirely wrong. That behavioral disconnect is everything.
Because without it, they just look like me.
Right. If that contextual analysis is absent, a criminal operates under the complete appearance of legitimacy. As you mentioned with the shoe store example, the institution's internal IT infrastructure might be functioning flawlessly.
There was no internal breach at the bank.
No one hacked the bank's mainframe. The vulnerability stems entirely from an external ecosystem exposure.
Wow.
This forces the bank to defend not just its own perimeter, but against the downstream consequences of every other poorly secured website you happen to use.
So the responsibility shifts from just guarding the steel vault to constantly monitoring the entire environment inside the building.
Exactly.
Which brings us to what happens after they get past that point-in-time gate. And I have to admit, the post-breach behavior detailed in the source is genuinely creepy.
It is very unsettling.
Because once the criminal slips past the bouncer with your valid password, their next move is almost never what you'd expect.
No.
It's rarely a dramatic, immediate heist where they drain your checking account and wire the money away in 5 seconds.
No, it is usually much more methodical. Criminals engage in a pattern of delayed exploitation.
The quiet invasion.
Yes.
They log in, survey the account, and then they just sit there. They test whether security settings can be changed. They look at your transaction history. Often they just collect intelligence for future fraud rather than stealing right away. The sheer patience of that is terrifying to me.
It really is.
The idea that a criminal might be sitting silently inside your banking app for weeks, just studying your habits, looking at your payees, figuring out when your direct deposit hits, mapping out a larger attack. I mean, it's deeply unsettling.
It is, but from a criminal enterprise standpoint, it is highly strategic. If we look at the broader financial crime lifecycle, that compromised account isn't just a piggy bank to smash open for a quick payday. It becomes a staging point. They might use your account to run mule operations.
Let's explain that real quick, why a criminal would want to use a legitimate account for a mule operation. I mean, why not just open a fake account to launder their money?
Because a newly minted account with no history is inherently suspicious to a bank's algorithms.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. But an account that has been open for 10 years with regular payroll deposits and grocery store purchases has a massive trust score.
Right.
If a criminal routes illicit funds through your legitimate account, the bank's systems are far less likely to flag the transfer because the account itself is trusted. They basically use your clean financial history to wash dirty money.
Wow, that's incredibly sneaky.
It is. And beyond mule operations, they might use it for application fraud, applying for new high-limit credit cards in your name, which is much easier because they're already logged into your verified trusted profile.
Or they might use it for social engineering.
Mm.
Because they have all your internal data. They can see exactly how much you spend on utilities, who you transfer money to, and the exact balance of your savings. So they can call customer service and impersonate you effortlessly, or they can email you pretending to be the bank's fraud department, citing deeply specific details only the bank should know, tricking you into sending them even more money.
Yes, and this phenomenon is known as convergence. Credential stuffing is the bridge.
The bridge between what?
It connects cyber-enabled crime, so the initial breach, the malware, or the phishing that got the password in the first place, with downstream financial crimes like anti-money laundering exposure and complex fraud.
Okay, so if these attackers are quietly sitting in the account, waiting to strike, why doesn't the bank connect the dots? Is it a technology failure or like a human one?
Well, according to the source, it is often a structural failure within the bank itself.
Structural. How
Yeah.
so?
Historically, a bank might have an information security team dealing with cyber threats, a totally separate fraud team dealing with stolen credit cards, and an anti-money laundering, or AML, team monitoring suspicious fund movements.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, if an institution strictly separates these teams into silos, they will fail to stop credential stuffing.
Because each team only sees one tiny piece of the puzzle. The InfoSec team looks at the network layer, sees a valid username and password, and just checks the box. The login is considered safe.
Right, and because the login is considered safe by InfoSec, the session appears tied to a genuine identity. This drastically weakens all the downstream transaction controls for the other teams.
So the AML team might eventually see a strange transaction.
Yes, but because it originated from a fully authenticated 10-year-old account that passed the InfoSec check, they might lower the threat level and let it slide.
That is wild. The criminal operates precisely in the blind spots between these isolated departments.
Exactly. Fragmented defenses detect these crimes too late, or they only detect pieces of them without ever seeing the whole picture.
So knowing all of this, knowing that attackers are incredibly patient, that they look exactly like genuine customers because they have the right password, and that they exploit the structural silos of a bank, how do institutions realistically stop them?
It's difficult.
Especially without locking legitimate users out of their own money. Like if my bank gets too aggressive with its security, I'm going to get locked out every single time I try to buy a coffee while traveling to a different state.
Right, that is the tightrope these institutions have to walk, and it requires building a layered defense. Preventative limits are absolutely necessary, but they are no longer complete solutions on their own.
And by preventive limits, we are talking about strong password hygiene requirements, multi-factor authentication, or MFA, and rate limiting.
Right, the systems that try to stop a bot from guessing thousands of passwords a second. Those are the basics, the front door controls. But attackers are highly adaptive. We discussed how they distribute their login attempts across massive, rotating residential IP infrastructures, so it doesn't look like a single bot attack to evade rate limits. But they also actively mimic human behavior to bypass MFA. They will intentionally target weaker recovery journeys.
Oh, you mean the I forgot my password loophole?
Yes, exactly. If the main login portal requires a complex MFA token sent to your phone, the attacker might click the I forgot my password link instead.
Because that recovery flow might be older, or it might only require an email verification.
Right. And if the attacker bought a list that includes your email password, which is incredibly common, by the way, they already control the email account.
Oh, wow. So they just approve their own password reset, bypass the heavy MFA entirely, and take over the account.
Precisely.
So if the preventive barriers at the front door aren't enough, it comes back to that contextual analysis you mentioned earlier. The bank needs robust detection capability inside the house.
Yes. Institutions must link technical attack traffic with behavioral consequences. It is not just about counting elevated failed logins anymore.
Right.
A sophisticated detection framework has to notice when there is a successful login from a slightly unusual device, say a browser version you've never used before, immediately followed by a sudden credential reset.
Or the creation of a new international payee.
Exactly. Or access at 3:00 a.m. when you normally only check your app during your lunch break. The strongest frameworks connect the upstream login event with the downstream suspicious activity in real time.
To actually pull this off, the coordination behind the scenes at a bank has to be massive.
It really does.
You're talking about linking the IT guys, blocking traffic with the fraud guys freezing funds, all while making sure legitimate transactions still go through without a hitch.
Yeah, they need hard, continuous metrics. What are the false positive rates? What are the downstream fraud losses? Because if leadership isn't tracking this at a high, unified level, the credential stuffing just gets misclassified as routine login noise.
And classifying these attacks as routine login noise is incredibly dangerous because it just minimizes the threat.
Right. And that organizational failure leads to perhaps the most sensitive part of this entire operational response, which is the reputational dimension.
Oh man, let's talk about the PR fallout. The human behavior side of this equation is fascinating to me. Imagine the PR nightmare when a customer's life savings are drained, and the bank has to sit down and gently explain to that customer that it happened because they used the same password for their checking account as they did for some sketchy online message board 5 years ago.
Very tough conversation.
The customer is going to be devastated and probably furious at the bank.
The psychology of the victim in these scenarios is complex. Customers almost always blame the institution for the compromise, regardless of the root cause.
Right. Even if the bank systems were perfectly secure.
Even if the breach originated at a local pizza shop's website, the customer feels violated. They look at the bank logo on their drained account statement, and that is where they direct their anger.
They think, you are a multi-billion-dollar bank. You were supposed to protect my money, and you failed.
Exactly. So the communication balance the institution must strike is incredibly delicate. Poor communication or a delayed robotic response instantly destroys whatever trust is left.
Yeah.
The institution has an immediate obligation to secure the account, freeze the outflow of funds, and reestablish safe access. But they also have to communicate the risk clearly to the customer without shifting responsibility in a way that sounds dismissive.
They can't just say, well, it's your fault for reusing the password. Better luck next time.
No, absolutely not.
That sounds operationally weak, it lacks empathy, and it makes the bank look completely helpless against the realities of the modern internet.
It implies the bank has no mechanism to protect customers from the ecosystem they operate in.
Right.
Instead, the bank must demonstrate that while the breach originated elsewhere, their layered contextual defenses are stepping in to mitigate the damage and protect the broader financial ecosystem. It is fundamentally about shared responsibility.
So the institution must lead with operational resilience, not finger-pointing.
Exactly.
Let's recap the journey we've just taken, because it really completely changes how you look at the digital locks on your life.
It does.
We started with a simple, overwhelmingly common habit, just reusing a password. But we've seen how credential stuffing transforms that single reused key into an industrialized entry point.
Right.
It's a massive volume-based business that uses proxy networks and automation to slip past point-in-time security gates. It allows criminals to quietly invade accounts, study behavior for weeks, and launch complex downstream financial crimes that exploit the internal blind spots of the banks themselves. And it is forcing the entire banking industry to shift from just guarding the front door to implementing continuous behavioral surveillance inside the house.
The most important takeaway from the source document is that in our highly interconnected digital economy, your personal digital hygiene is not just your own isolated problem. It is part of a massive shared ecosystem of risk. When you reuse a password, you are inadvertently providing ammunition to a global criminal enterprise. It affects not just your wallet, but the integrity of the financial system as a whole.
It really makes you look at that little password entry box differently. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Okay.
We talked about how attackers are actively learning to adapt to these new defenses, right? They're learning to mimic human behavior to bypass behavioral monitoring systems.
Yes.
So imagine a near future where these bots don't just know your password. What happens when the criminals eventually train their systems to perfectly simulate the exact speed at which you type on your phone?
Oh, wow.
Or the precise angle and pressure your thumb uses to swipe across the screen? If the bots can flawlessly impersonate the physical context of your behavior, how long until the very concept of a typed password becomes completely obsolete?
That's a scary thought.
It really is. It might force us to rely on something far more intimate, far more biological, just to prove to a machine that we are who we say we are. Think about that the next time you use the same master key to unlock every door in your digital life.